Welcome, everybody. Glad that everybody could join today. I'm Phil Steiger, and I have here Jason Quartermont with me today. Before I get started, I wanted to say Jason and I came up with this idea about the real cost for data. It's just not a file, because over the last couple of months, we've had several customers get ransomware or have other type of virus attacks, and their data's been compromised. And we thought, well, I think this was a great opportunity to explore what the true cost of your data is to your company, and have you thought of that, and how do you protect that? So let's get started. So we'll go over introductions, Jason and myself, and then we'll get into true cost of a file, the overhead, today's design process, man hours, where you're storing your files, backing up your data, and I messed that one up. We can't see the future.
We'd like to.
Yeah, we'd like to. We could. You guys would be paying us to tell you what's going to happen in the future. So I'm Phil Steiger. I am the practice lead for Vault, PLM, and all for the data management here at KETIV. And I have along with me Jason, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, my name's Jason. I oversee all of the planning and architect, the way we connect Vault and PLM, ERP, things like that.
So the true cost of a file. We think of a file as just something we produce, and we either store it on a server or in Vault or somewhere in the cloud, but it's much more than just that. And so I broke it down into 5 different areas of what you have to look at when you're thinking about the cost of a file, that you produce in your business. The first part is the overhead, and that's your office space, the computers, the servers, and the software that you pay for to actually be able to first produce a design file. And then it's the ideas and the time you spend coming up with the research and define, and you iterate, and then you design, and then you create a prototype of the file, several prototypes. And then you have the engineering aspect, where you have engineers, designers, checkers, data analysts who are moving that information. Once the design file is done, they're putting it in your ERP so you can order parts, materials to produce whatever that part may be. And then you have the updates, the changes and the revisions that happen along the way during the design process, or as you improve that part. And then the last one is the file of truth, and that is your released version of that part, and that file, and that's what you're going to manufacture to. And that's your biggest and most important file in all these stages.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget all these things that are behind it, especially when you're in Vault and you just see a PDF or someone's printed it. It's easy to think of it as one document, but it's all these steps, all these hours, all these iterations, never mind like critical engineering data. Your one source of truth lives in those released documents.
So I sort of like to look at the overhead as a big cost in producing those files. And I think sometimes we miss the amount of money we spend in that overhead. We'll go out and spend that money, but then we don't take the time to spend the money down on the other end to secure those files, so that if we do get hit with ransomware, we're able to retrieve those quickly and easily. So you look at office space, computers, personnel, server, and software, and you start adding that up, and you times it by the number of employees. And then you take it one step further. You take that amount of money you're spending on all that, and you take about the amount of files you produce in a year by that cost, and you'll start to see what the cost is per file per, over a year's time. And then you'll see what your true cost of that file might be. A lot of people think that, oh, some guy just sits down at his computer and in just a few minutes, he knocks out a file, an inventor, he just draws it up and puts it in Vault, or away we go. And it's just really not true.
Especially when you think of, some customers that have, 1,000 part assemblies or tens of thousands, or, they're, we're not making washers here. There's this substantial amount of R&D time to modeling. It's usually not one person making the assembly or the drawing, it's a team effort.
So I found this, and I love this representation of today's design process. I think it speaks volumes to most companies' design process. It's, you might have you have the top line where you have uncertainty and patterns and insight, and on the bottom you have research, concepts, and prototypes. But really, it's just this scrambled, I don't know, process. And sometimes it isn't clearly defined. And then you get in, once you have a prototype, you start to get clarity and focus, and then you get a real design. And that final is that release PDF that we can manufacture too.
That's just Rev A, like, never mind the feedback later from customers, from RMAs, from defects, real world feedback for version B or C or et cetera. That has to go through a similar process.
And so it's a continuous loop that it goes through once it has been released, because then it goes back and into, comes in for an RMA, then it has to be revised, then it goes through checking, and then it gets released again. So there's that constant loop feed that's happening. So when you think of man hours that it takes to do or produce a drawing, it isn't just usually one person. There's a lot of people who are usually involved for to produce that one drawing usually. And we look at it as designer engineer times 2, probably 10 days of back and forth. A lot of concept drawings come out of that. Then you have the checker, and it could be multiple checkers, and those days might not be full 5 days, but you think about when you're doing checking in your business and you have 3 or 4 people doing checking, it gets to one person and it might sit for several days before that person actually checks it. So that takes a longer time for you to get that file to that final revision, to the file of truth, because the checking process takes a long time. And then the release, it's usually just, a designer or somebody releasing it to a production. Might take an hour or so, but it's his time to do that. And then when you start adding it up and you look at it over to get that file, it could be 16 days before you have a release file. And a lot of that's hours spent trying to release that file. So then you start looking, what is your cost per drawing? It starts to go up. Those files are just not, we think of them as, I've heard from people that it's just a file. Well, it's not just a file. There's a lot of labor and a lot of cost behind that file. And it, especially when it's your own IP, because you're developing, something of yours. And if you lose that file, and if you're doing one-offs for businesses, so you're producing unique machines for each customer, what happens if you lose those files?
You service it.
Yeah. How do you then service it? It's not like you go out to the shop and just, take measurements of the current stuff that's being produced. It's a one-off. You got warranty. Those drawings are very valuable. Some of the things we look at are your files on a file server. And if they are, you can't search for metadata in those files. You're very limited in that. It's also a gaping security hole, because if they're on a file server and you're giving all your engineers full access to all of your drawings, it's very easy to stick a thumb drive and a computer and all of your data is copied, and you might not even know that they've done it. And they walk
And
out the
also,
door.
there's nothing stopping you from editing the release drawing. So which one's the latest and which one do you send to the shop?
Or overwriting it and not realizing you overwrote a drawing. And 2 years later, you go to use that drawing and you realize the drawing's wrong. You might not have a backup from 2 years ago to recover from.
Yeah, and it's easy to think like just as something as simple as nudging a hole, makes all the CNC stuff out of date, and if that's such a small change, it'd be very hard for someone to catch it.
Until you manufacture it and try to
Yep.
mate it with something else.
Exactly. That'll be very obvious.
Yes. We see customers that are using OneDrive or Dropbox to store their files, and it's
it can be a headache because it's like, is it synced? Do you have the latest one? Does your coworker have the latest one? Who edited it last?
Yeah.
Very similar to shared folder problems.
And one of the biggest ones is end user desktop. And that's probably the scariest thing of all, because you don't know where your drawings are. Really no collaboration going on there. And desktops crash a lot more often than servers do. And they're usually not backed up ever. So Vault or another PDM solution is probably your best way to go in these environments. It helps you with the single source of truth.
It centralizes all your data. You can easily back it up. You can search the metadata. You have the entire history of how the files evolved over time. You can actually very easily go back and download an older version. And it really gives you an easy way of like where use and uses to see, all the files that are linked to this file. Be able to search any of the metadata. It's like on a shared folder, the iProperties and Inventor, you have the metadata, but there's no easy way to search it. Vault really brings all that metadata to life.
But there's still an issue with all of these at the end of the day. And that is backing up your data. I know that Vault has its own backup solution, but it backs it up to the server usually. But you still need to get that data off of that server and onto a tape, another disk that is not attached to the network once it's done backing it up. Or, I know there's a lot of internet options now, like Veeam and stuff like that, offloads it into the cloud. Because if you're just backing it up to the server, onto the same server, and you get hit with, ransomware, or God forbid, the hard drives just go south on you, that backup you're not doing yourself any good. And tape sounds archaic and old as a solution, but man, it is the best DR solution you have out there. You run it, you put it on a tape, you take it away. If it's sitting in a safe, or you're using a third-party tape collection company to pick them up, guess what? If you get ransomware or something happens to your data center or the server, grab that tape. You know that nobody's had access to it. Disk to disk, it's a good option, but at the same time, hopefully it's not on the net.
You have to remember to do it. That's part of the reason why they don't get done is, hard drives are cheap. Even if you were to just copy, the Vault backup off the server once a month to another disk and put it in your desk drawer, losing 4 weeks of data is better than losing all your data.
Right. And then if you do have a DR plan, have you ever tested it? I know, because the last place I worked, every year we had an annual DR test, really shine light on our weaknesses of where things were broken, and every year we improved and we got better and better at it. But I guarantee you, if we just had that DR plan in place and never tested it, we'd have been in a lot of trouble if something would have happened, because there was holes in the beginning. you know, and you have to work on that. You don't
Well,
realize you didn't
yeah.
back certain things up.
Well, the first time you deploy your DR solution should not be under the pressure of, I really need to get all this data back. I have all, you know, some of you had anywhere from 3 to 10 to 20 engineers. You know, it's a lot of pressure on whoever's doing it when you have that many people twiddling their thumbs and no one's been able to do any work.
Well, I was lucky enough that we stood up a separate domain and we moved it all to a different domain when we did our DR tests in my last job. So it made it, we weren't messing with production at all. So, but yeah, I mean, in a real DR solution, you know, what is your timeline to get it back up and running? You know, is it 24 hours, 48 hours? Oh, what's the pressure of having people up and running? And how long can your company be down without, you know, that data? You know, and you have to figure, that's another thing you have to look at. For every hour that the shop doesn't have data to produce something, what is it costing the company? You know, that's a big money loss. Not just the engineers working, but if the shop can't produce stuff and they're shut down, there's an hourly cost associated with that. So we can't see the future, you know, but if you lost all your data, could you recreate all your drawings? That's a question we should all ask ourselves. You know? Or do we, you know, that's why that's why we're having this conversation today, because we want to bring more awareness to it, because we're starting to see it more. You know, ransomware is getting worse and worse. It's out there, and it's just, there's a lot of evil people in the world doing this and shutting companies down. And if you're in a business and IT can take the necessary steps just to protect your intellectual property, it's great. And like we said, what's a couple external hard drives? Still less than $500 to plug it into your server, copy that backup off if that's all you have, stick it in a desk drawer, do it maybe twice a month, you know. At least if something was to happen, you're only 2 weeks out instead of everything lost. Because it's not good.
And even if you know, even if you were like, let's say a company that made a handful of products, you know, and you had to remake them, make all the drawings, like that would take you months to go and measure everything, redraw everything, you know, and that's if you're fortunate enough to make a handful of products and have ones that you can go measure. But like Phil mentioned, you know, the companies that are doing one-off things or you know, have decades of engineering data and that are used for reference material, like there's no way to easily recreate that.
So that's what I have today. We're going to open it up for questions now. If anybody has any questions.
Yes, at the bottom of the screen, there should be a question and answer. Just select on that and then just put them in. We'd love the questions. Also be interested in people's own experience with data loss or vault, or what would be the impact to you if you imagined, you know, if you lost all your data and had to start from scratch, it'd be a tremendous inconvenience.
And we just did this. We just want to shed light to it, you know, because sometimes it gets lost in the shuffle because we're all busy working and trying to produce. Yes. Does DR stand for disaster recovery? Yes, it does.
Yeah, because, you know, right now we have a lot more options in terms of making a plan, executing it, testing it. You know, it's very easy to do things now. When something happens, whether it's lightning strike, flood, ransomware, hard drive, or hardware failure, disgruntled employee, like anything can happen. And so it's worth taking the necessary steps.
Yes, we can you rely on a vendor to manage my data and support it? Yes. I mean, we offer Vault as a service today, and we manage customers' vaults in the cloud. We do all the backup. We have a DR solution in place. We generate, monthly reports on Vault usage for the customers. And the customers that are in the cloud love it because it's one less thing that their IT has to take care of. Vault's a beast on its own, and a lot of IT people are not familiar or want to deal with the engineering side of the house.
Yeah, it's great that some of you already have a DR solution backing up Vault, backing up local PCs. Exactly, little things like that make all the difference, so that you don't have to worry about it.
It's just a lot of companies don't think about it. Or they think it's never going to happen to me.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm not big enough to be a target.
Right. Unfortunately, it comes to an email or something really dumb that one of your end users, it looks legit and they click on it, and next thing you know, you
have an experience.
Yeah. Or you're shut down for 3 weeks.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of getting your files in Vault so that you have or another PDM software so that you have a central source of truth. Vault makes it easy to back up all that data, and then at that point you just need to either copy the backup to another server or offline backups to a disk or a tape, just so that you have options.
You're saying he uses a tech company to maintain our system company-wide. Totally worth it. It is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I remember when I was young and I worked in an engineering office and we had a little outsourced IT. It was the best. Any other questions, comments? Jason, I think we can wrap this up. Thank you for coming on with me today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's always good to bring awareness because it's one of those things. It's easy to get busy and not think about it, and until it happens to you, it's very easy to forget the magnitude.
Yes.
Because your business, you guys sell a product. If you can't make that product or can't service that product, how can the business pivot from that? It'd be very hard.
That's very true. Well, thank you guys, everybody, for joining. I appreciate your time. And we'll talk to you later.